Okay, so before we can start, we need to first, do a few things. So the first thing we're gonna need is to go to React to the documentation. So if you go to the web and type React, here we get, React, a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So if we go here, of course, it's gonna give you the main screen and the docs with everything else. So I'm gonna go to the docs, and you should do the same. And you're gonna get, all the advanced guides, pretty much all the documentation. So what we care right now, it's about the create a new React application. So if you go here, it's gonna give you a bunch of things. You don't need to read all of this. The only thing you need to do is to go where it says create React app. So it says create React app is a comfortable environment for learning React, whatever. Okay. So what it says right here is that we can install or use something to create kind of a boilerplate in our of React in our directory, right? So we can do something like this, for example, and this will create a React application with a development server and everything else we need to work. And now it says you'll need to have a node greater or equal than 6 and an npm greater than 5 and that too. So just to run the boilerplate, just to run this and create a React application in our computer, we need to have Node installed. So we're gonna need to install Node. So I'm gonna go to Google, and of course, if you do have Node, you can skip the installation, and you only need to check that which version you get right here, which versions you have. So okay, so I'm gonna go to Node. You will need to type Node.js if you don't have it, and just click on Node. So as soon as you go to Node, you're gonna get two options, right? If you're on Windows, this one is gonna say Windows. So the only thing we need to do is to download the installer. So you get the 10.15, which is the recommended by most users. You could download this if you want. This is a little bit more, let's say, secure because it's very stable. And this one is the latest one. I've got this one, and I've already have it installed in my computer. I'm not going to install it again, but I'm just going to, download and just show you what we get. So I'm going to download that. It's going to take a second. It's not a large, installer. It's very, very small. So whenever this is done, of course, you will need to open it. If you're on Windows, you're going to get the .exe. You just need to click on the exe. So let me just show you what you're going to get. You're going to get this package which will install the 11.12, or maybe you're getting the 10.15, which is going to be the same. Then of course, you just need to continue, clicking on continue. I'm going to agree. The installation type, of course, is going to be your hard drive. Then you're going to do install, and then, of course, it's going to ask you for this. All right, I'm installing it again, All right, so now, of course, you're going to get this version of Node in your computer, the 11.12 or maybe the 10.15. And then you get the version of NPM. So by the documentation, we have this specs. So now we can create a React application. Now there's a couple ways just to check if you have a Node installed in your computer. Sometimes the installer is just not enough. So I'm going to close it, and I'm going to move to trash. And there's two ways you can do it. You can go to your computer. If you're on Windows, you can go and search CMD and bring the command prompt. And once you're in the command prompt, you're going to type a couple commands. I'm going to tell you in a second. And if you're on Mac, a Mac user, you can go to the terminal. Maybe you can search for terminal right here. And you're going to get it right here. So what you can do is to type node, and then -v. So if you press enter, this will tell you the version of Node that you're running in your computer. If you're not getting anything, most likely you will need to restart the computer. And that's it. And again, if you're on Windows, maybe you need to restart the computer. That's the safest. So what happens with npm? So we get pretty much the same idea. If you do npm -v, we're going to press it, and we get the 6.7.0. Same thing. You should be getting, the version in your computer. Maybe you're watching this in the future, so you're gonna get a greater version, and that's okay. Now, if you're not getting this, maybe you're getting kind of a command not recognized or something like that. You will need to restart the computer. All right, I'm gonna close this, and now on this course, I'm not gonna use the terminal because I'm working on Mac, and we know that with Mac the terminal works really, really good. But maybe you're on Windows and the terminal it's not that great. So instead of using this one, I'm going to close this one, and I'm going to use the integrated terminal of, the VS Code. I'm going to use VS Code, of course. So once inside the project, notice I'm already inside the directory where I'm going to create my application. I'm going to go right here at the top, and I'm going to do terminal, and I'm going to click on new terminal. So this will create an instance of the terminal in your computer. And the cool thing about this is that we don't need to navigate to this directory. When we do installations, we need to be on this directory. So if I do ls, which is, all the files I get right here, I get nothing. If I create maybe a file or something like that, it's going to show us the file. So if I do cd ... let me just show you cd ... it's going to go one directory up. And if I now do ls, I get the directories I get on that directory, right? So I'm getting the React 01, which is this one. But again, I want to be inside that directory, so I'm going to do cd React 01. All right, then I'm going to do clear. And now, since we are on this directory, all right, what we need to do is to install the boilerplate. So I'm going to go here, and it says what you need to do is to run npx create React app and the name of the application. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to show you what to do. So I'm going to paste it right here. Now, if we trigger something like this, React, what it's going to do is going to create a directory called my app inside of the current directory, or whatever you are. Maybe you're in documents, doesn't matter. It's going to create a directory called my app, and it's going to put all the logic of React and Node and everything else inside that directory. Now, in this case, since I'm already inside the directory I don't want to create a subdirectory. What I want to do is to put all the files inside. So what we do is that. And this is completely up to you. And maybe in another scenario, if I'm not using the terminal from VS Code, I would of course go to the terminal, navigate maybe to the parent directory, and do npx create React app and the name of the application, so I can create a directory. In this case, I do not really care about that. I want to bring all the files here. So what we do, we just press enter. And this, of course, will begin the installation. Okay, so it's going to start installing things and bringing packages and everything else. Now, I'm going to show you something else. Maybe an year ago, maybe a little bit less, we were not able to do npx. This is kind of new. What we will have to do is something that calls install global. Let me see if I can get something on the documentation. No, it's not telling us. We will install CLI. So we install a CLI called create React app in a global way, and then we do create React app and the name of the application. So maybe you're gonna go to the web and try to find some information, or maybe some other examples on the web, and you're gonna see that they start the application without the npx. They're gonna say create React app and then just the name of the app. And that that is with the CLI. Now this is the new way of doing things with React and bringing the boilerplate. All right, so it's almost done. So this computer, it's pretty fast, but the connection right now, it's just not that good. Okay, almost done. All right, so everything was installed. So when this is done doing things, it's going to give you something at the end. It says npm start, build, test, and run eject. So we're going to talk about the eject later. The one we care right now is the npm start and maybe the build. So with the first one, with npm start, we can trigger this from the directory, this directory, and this one will create a development server. So what is a development server? So when we work with applications, of course, we are not going to open an index.html, let's say, from maybe your directory, your computer. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a server, a simulation of a server, and our application is going to be inside that simulation. So by doing just npm start, since this is a boilerplate, React already knows that it needs to create a development server and put our React application inside, so we can see it on the browser. And this is what npm start does. It's going to create that development server, and it's going to show us the application that we are building on a dev environment. Then with the build, of course, when we are done with our application and we want to put everything in a real server, in a real server, we do the build, and then we just, put the files on the real server. Then with this one, we can run tests, and this one is a little bit specific. We're going to talk about this later. We don't need to use it right now. All right, so how can we start everything? Okay, so I'm going to go here and say npm and then start. I'm gonna press enter. This is gonna do a couple things, and at the end you're gonna see something that says listening on localhost and everything else. All right, so it says you can view React 01, which is the application we are creating, on localhost 3000, and this is the port. So by default, it creates this development server on the localhost 3000. Now, let me just bring the tab because I have another browser open, so it's just opening there. Let me put it right here. So if you go to your browser and you go to local 3000, you're gonna get this. You're gonna get the React application. Right. So good, man. So this means that we do have a React application running in our computer, and it's working. Of course, we get the boilerplate. It's very, very simple. So it says edit src app.js and save to reload. So if you go right here to the src, we're gonna get a bunch of files. Don't worry, we're gonna talk about them, or we're gonna maybe dispose some of these files. So if we go to the app.js, this is where everything starts. And if you can see, we can see our code right here, and we get the content that we are showing right now. So if I say, docs, whatever, and I save it, it's gonna hot reload and show us the changes. So by default, we get hot reloading. Whenever we make a change, it's gonna go to the browser and reload the application for us. So again, the boilerplate, it's very, very cool. So you can, of course, manually install everything that got to do with React and create everything manually. But again, since we get this boilerplate, it's much, much easier to bring the create React app, just delete the files we don't need, and then, just move forward. We don't need to do all the Webpack logic and everything else. All right. Okay, let's go to the next section. I'm going to talk about a little bit of what's happening right here when we create the application, and then we're going to go and talk about what we get right here. Right, so let's begin with what we care. Let's begin with the fun part. I'm just gonna need it to explain you a little bit of what's happening right here. Just you can know a little bit of what's happening. I'm gonna close this. I'm gonna just close this and close this. We don't need it right now. And I'm gonna put this. All right, so I'm gonna go back to our application. So what we get, of course, when we create the application, it's the node modules. So inside here, we're gonna get all the the files and JavaScript and everything that our application will use. And as you can see, there is a pretty long list. So of course, you don't need to touch this node modules. You don't need to touch it. I will not recommend you that you manually touch the files. So then what we care is the the package.json, where all the dependencies that we will install, they're gonna be kind of noted right here. This is like the index. And then of course we get the public and the source, and these ones are the ones we really care. These ones host the logic for our application. So if we go to the public, of course you're gonna get a fav icon, the manifest.json, and the index.html. And as you can see, we get pretty much the same thing we were getting before with the root, And then of course we don't get the bundle. This one will get injected when we kind of bundle everything to go to the browser. All right, okay. So then we get the source. Now, we're gonna get a bunch of files and all the logic we get from the start from the boilerplate, but we're gonna do everything manually. So I don't want to go through all these files. I'm just gonna delete pretty much everything, and we're gonna start creating everything ourselves. So let me just bring the directory right here. So for this, let me go to the React application. I could delete it from here, but if we do it from here, it's like really annoying. We cannot delete all the files at once. So I'm gonna go to the directory, I'm gonna go to the source, and I'm gonna pretty much delete everything. Yeah, we don't need anything. All right, so I'm gonna close this one, and we get nothing inside. All right, so the only thing we're gonna do is just to create an index.js. So index.js. So when the React starts, it will look for an index.js inside the source directory. This is the default behavior. So we need an index.js. All right. So to start, of course, we need to start writing things. Now, whenever you work with the React, you're coding a React application, we use components or views. And this is the first keyword you need to remember, components. So the components are pieces of code we connect so they can work together. So we write everything in JavaScript, and whenever everything gets compiled, we see the HTML on the browser, right? That's the way it works. So in React, we use functions or classes with JavaScript. And then, of course, it would look like HTML. But in real life, we don't write HTML. We use something that it's called JSX. And of course, we're going to use them, and we're going to talk a little bit of this later. So for now, the only thing we're going to do, I'm just going to create a function. I'm going to say const. I'm going to create a variable function called app. Then this one, it's going to be equal to something, and then we're going to return a function. So this one is a fat arrow function. If you don't know ES6, you should learn a little bit about ES6. Okay. So the only thing that this fat arrow function does, it's gonna return some content. So in this case, I'm just gonna return an H1 with the classic hello world. All right, that's it. So this is the only thing we get in our application. So React will go, when it kicks in, it's gonna go to the source, find the index, and it says, okay, I have a function, so I'm gonna render that, and you're gonna get an error. So it's going to say React must be in scope when using JSX. So when we work with the React, it kind of has a bundle, just kind of a part in the application where you're going to get very useful error messages, right? And you should always check the error messages because they make sense. It says that we are using a function and we are trying to use some JSX. Now, remember that this one, I told you that this one looks like HTML, but it's not HTML, it's JavaScript. So it's saying, dude, you're using JSX, but React must be in the scope when you're using it. So when we want to use JSX, not just JavaScript, we want to use the React logic, we need to import React into this file. How do we do it? Well, we're going to go at the top and say we want to import React from then React. Now, just importing this, it's not gonna really work. It's gonna, of course, we're not gonna give us the console log, but we need to do something else. At least we don't get an error. So I'm gonna go to the inspect and see if we get something right here. All right. So it says line app is assigned a value, but it's never used. So now we are not getting that JSX error. Now it's saying that we have a function, but that we are not really using, right? We created a function, but we are not really using it. So in order to make it work, we need to tell the application, tell React, that we want to start right here. This is the main start of our application. So I'm going to go at the bottom, and I'm going to bring something that calls React DOM. So React DOM, what it's going to do is going to do a render. What is going to be rendering? Well, I want to render the app I have right here. The only thing we want to do is to do hello world. So if we go to the application, it's going to say React DOM. It's not defined. So again, we are trying to use something that it's not flowing in this application. So we will need to go at the top and import React DOM. So import React DOM. Now, of course, all these dependencies get installed when we do the create React app. So this one calls React DOM. All right. So I'm going to save it and going to go back to the application, and now we get other error messages. So target container is not a DOM element. So what we are saying right here is that we want to grab the the logic we get in our application, just the H1, and we want to render the application with React DOM. But React DOM cannot understand this. What we need to do is to tell React DOM where we want to put our application. Where do we want to put it? Well, we want to put the application inside the index.html and the root. So the application is going to go right here and inject that H1. That's what is going to happen. But we need a way to tell the React DOM that we want to go there and put it inside the root element. So what we do, we pass a second argument. So we're going to say document dot get element by ID, and this is just classical, vanilla JavaScript. And we're going to say, okay, just go to the index, find an element that has the ID of root. Now, after you find this, put inside whatever logic we get inside the the app function. So if I save this, we're going to get, again, not a different error message. So it's going to say functions are not valid as React childs. So we cannot pass a function, just a regular function, to React so we can render this. What we need to pass, it's a component. Remember, I told you we're going to use components. So how can we make this app function, because it's just a function that returns JSX, into a component? So we kind of create it like a tag. So this is the way we get with React to make functions or classes to turn them into components. Of course, we're going to do a lot of this. So if I save it right now, we get the hello world. So maybe you're saying, dude, when we install the React application, we kind of already get the index.js with all that logic. Why doing this again? Yeah, of course. In real life, that's what you're going to do. You're going to create a React application, and you're going to use the already, index.js that you get with the template, with the boilerplate. But I would just wanted to do this because now you know that we need an index.js. That's the main file that's going to kick in. That we need to import the React dependencies in order to make a JSX work, and that we need to tell the React DOM, which is the React application, that we want to render that initial component. All right, that's why we are doing this. All right, so let's go to the next one, and of course we can expand all of this. So in the previous section, we were outputting an H1 tag. And of course, we know now that this is not HTML, that this is JSX that comes from React. Now, of course, what we get this is kind of this simple way, kind of a readable for humans, we get with React. So in real life, behind the scenes with React, something else is happening, all right? So I'm gonna comment all of this, and I'm gonna go at the bottom. So our function wants to return an HTML. So what it does in reality, when we run this, React is going to run something inside of React, I'm making a reference to this, that calls create element, just like this. So create element, it's the method. Now the method will accept a bunch of properties and arguments. So if we want to create an H1, I'm going to say, okay, I want to create an H1. If I go to the application and reload it and kind of go to the inspect, I'm going to go to body, I'm going to go to root, and we are kind of getting, let me make this bigger, we are getting the H1. So again, it works just like the other one. And it's because, of course, this happens behind the scenes. And of course, if you wanted to add more things, because in real life you would want to, let's say I want to pass a second argument. So the second argument is what's going to go inside that element. I'm going to do class name, just like this, and we're going to talk about class name in a second. I'm going to do class name, and I want to add the title. So if I reload the application, React is going to go and inject that class. And of course, if we wanted to add one more element, let's say, I don't know, maybe a text inside of the H1, I'm going to say hello world. And don't worry, I'm just showing you this. So now we get, the hello world. So behind the scenes, this is what React's doing whenever we do this. And of course, just, doing this every time we need to create a component or HTML, doing this, it just would be crazy. But when we kind of run the application, React is going to convert this into this. This what's happening behind the scenes. And for example, if I wanted to add maybe one more div, I'm going to do comma, and the next property inside this React create element is going to be React, then create element, just like this, open and close, and I want to add a div. So everything happens kind of in a chain. So if I do this, we can see the H1, the hello world, and the div inside the same instance. And again, just doing this every time we want to create something would be crazy. This one we get right here at the top. It's much, much simpler. But again, I just want to let you know what's happening behind the scenes. Let me just comment this one at the bottom. Let me just comment out. All right. Now, when we create applications, of course, we're going to use the JSX, right? Okay. Now, again, if right now we are just returning one single statement. Let me just copy this one because it's visually bothering me. All right. So when we return, we are just returning a single statement. And that's why we are getting it right here. All right. We are saying return just a single H1. Now, what happens if I add one more thing? Let's say I want to add a div. And this one says, I don't know, goodbye, whatever, goodbye. And I save this, it's going to give us an error message. So, and this is kind of a pure JavaScript as well. We can return, whenever we return from a function, a single statement, and that will work. If you're passing two statements, you're just like doing render this one and return this one as well. That's not going to work. So what we need to do is we need to grab all of this and put it inside a parenthesis. Now, if we put it here and we paste it, it's going to kind of work, but we kind of get the same error message. And this is because, again, we are returning two different elements. Now, what we can do, I'm going to go here and write a div and put everything inside a single div. Now, of course, now we are returning a single element that has child components, child elements. So if we reload this, that's going to work. So you always need to be aware of what you're returning in your component, right? If you're returning many things, that's not going to work. You always need to return one single thing, one single element, and inside everything else that you want to add. Now, of course, you can use classes. Let's say that you want to add a class. I'm going to go to the main div. I'm going to say, okay, so I want to add a class of, hey, doesn't matter. So I'm going to reload the application, and of course, the application renders, but it kind of fails just a little bit. If I go to the root, we see the class hey, but if I go to the console, we get an error message. It says invalid DOM property class. Did you mean class name? So with React, we cannot use this. Now remember that this, it's not HTML. It's not HTML. It's JSX. It's JavaScript code that looks like HTML that gets converted behind the scenes to get injected just like HTML. But we are not really doing a class. So we cannot use this keyword because it's reserved by the system. So we cannot use class. What we can use instead is class name. So if I just do this, we're going to see the class right here, but we get no error messages, and that's going to work. So again, this one, it's going to, if you're not used to work with React, this one, it's gonna take you a while to get used to, because when you're just coding really fast, you're gonna say, oh, I'm gonna add a class, and you're gonna do this, and then you're gonna get the error messages. So it's gonna take a little while until you get used to change class for class name inside a component. Again, it's just gonna take a while. It's normal. We all been there. So okay. So now as for React 16.8, I believe. Before actually 16.8, and this is the version we are running, 16.8, before this version, we had no way of just rendering whatever content without, wrapping everything inside of a div, or, this could be a span or whatever. Span, let me just change it to span. All right, span. All right, sorry for that, span. If I reload it, we get no error messages. It doesn't matter. Whatever element or tag you put right here, it doesn't matter. Now, we had no way to maybe not write just a div or a span and just an HTML element. Now, as for React 16.8, they give us something called Fragments. So I'm going to go and just delete this, and I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to say React dot and then fragment. And of course, we're going to do the, the closing. Right, okay. So let me do it correctly. So if I reload the application, of course, that works. Now, what is the difference of using a div or a span, or maybe using React Fragment? The problem is that when you use a div, you're creating extras with the extra div components, extra DOM elements. So this is going to return, and it will create a div if you're using a div. So maybe on this application, it doesn't really matter because we don't have a lot of things. But as your application grows bigger, you're gonna, with every component, you're gonna start injecting divs and divs and divs and divs. And that is a problem because you get a lot of content that you're not really using. So as for React 16.8, we can use React Fragments, and they will not create an extra div. Notice that we are not wrapping the hello world and the goodbye with, just the div. All right, so again, you can use React Fragments, and we will use this one because it's new. Now, another thing that it's, kind of annoying is that every time we have to do this, we need to type React Fragment. So we get a short version of doing this. We can delete this, and just, leave it like an empty tag. And that one will work as if we're using React Fragment. Really cool. And of course, if you need to wrap everything inside of a div, you can, of course, create a div here. Whatever. All right, just let me create a div, and I'm gonna put everything inside. And then of course, if you want to use class names, you can add a class name. All right, so let's again do hey, and this one of course is gonna work. All right, man. So very cool. Again, we're just doing baby steps. All right, baby steps. So let's go to the next one, and I want to talk about the project structure of what we're gonna do right now. So whenever you build this kind of apps, it's very common to break everything into small components. It's pretty common. Now, if you know WordPress or maybe any PHP framework, for example, you know that you need to break every single part into small pieces, and then at the end you will of course tie them together. And this is called modular programming. It's very common. So I'm going to bring a chart to show you what we're going to do right now in the next couple sections, just to learn React. We're going to create a dummy news home. It's going to be very simple, nothing fancy. So let me just show you the charts right here. So of course, when we start the application, we get that index.js where we're going to start everything. So that's going to be kind of the starting point. Then we were going to create a new file that calls maybe app.js. And this app.js will contain the different parts of our application. All right, so now we get our app file. Now this app file will contain references to the header, right? You always get a header, so we're going to get a header. And this header, of course, is going to be a completely different component. Then, of course, we need the content of the application, so we will create a different component that calls news component. Now this news component will get, of course, maybe different news, right? Different news items. So for each item, we're going to create a different component that is going to rule the logic. So again, we can see that we get the app, which is the main one. We get the header, a different component, the news component, and the news list, the items. And again, this is a different component. So right from the start, we get 4 different components. All right, so let me close this, and we're going to start with this. So I'm going to go to the source and start creating the files we're going to use to achieve that project structure. And maybe you notice I'm going a little bit slow, and again, it's because we are just starting. So I'm assuming that you know nothing about this. Maybe you have some experience and this is just a little bit slow for you, but as we advance through the most basic parts, I'm going to go a little bit faster. So I'm going to go to source, and by default, by convention, we need to put all the components of our application inside the components directory. So I'm going to go and do components. What else? I'm going to create a new file. This one will host the logic for the header component. Then we get a main of news. So I'm going to call this one news and list.js. And then we get a different component for each news. So I'm going to go and say pretty much same news list, and I'm going to do item. Of course, you can call this whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Okay, so now we have the main component that starts everything, and then we get 3 different components. I'm going to start with the header because it's a simple one. So on this one, when we want to create a React component, we need to start the same way we started right here. We need to import React from React. Why do we want to do this? Well, we want to return some JSX. So if you want JSX, you need to import React. So I'm going to create a const called header. And this header is going to be a function that returns some JSX, just like we did previously. So in this case, I'm just going to create a div that says header, just nothing else. So now what's the problem? All right, so we get one component, the one that starts everything, and then we get a different component. So what we want to do is say that whenever we start the application, we want to include that header component inside, the application. So we can need to bring this header file, this component, here inside the index.js, and then let the application know we want to use it. So in order to do that, to link to different files, we need to let the application know that this function can be used from within other components. The way we do that, and this is ES6, not just React, it's ES6. So I'm going to say export and then default, and then I'm going to go and say header. And again, this is ES6, not React. So now this file can be used from within other files. So I'm going to go right here at the top and say I want to import a component and in this case it's called header. And then of course we need to say it from dot / we go to the components directory / and we bring the header. So now of course I'm going to delete this, we don't need it. What we can do, we're going to copy the name of whatever you create right here, you're going to put it right here. Now this of course it's not going to work because React, it will assume that you want to add some text. So it will, convert this to a text. So what we want to say is that we want to return to render whatever we have inside the header component. So we turn this into a React component by doing this. Remember, we kind of did this the same with the app component. So if I go to the application, we get the header, and now we are getting whatever it's inside that component. Really, really cool. So right now we are returning just a div. And of course, inside JSX, when we are using JSX, we can do a bunch of things. We're not just returning divs with text, of course. We can do some kind of inline statements right here. So if I open and close and say that I want to bring the date, and then now, this is going to give us, this is JavaScript, of course, just raw JavaScript. It will give us the date. So since this one returns a value, the JSX knows that we want to return a value, so it's going to put it there, for us. Now remember that this kind of a statement can only return a single expression. We cannot put a lot of things right here. So for example, let's say I want to create a const that calls a new date, for example, just standard JavaScript. And this one, of course, will return a new date, just like this. And then I want to return maybe the new date, just like we did before, new date, and get full year. And again, this is all just standard JavaScript. And then I want to get the full year. Let me just finish it. And then of course a function. So we are creating a variable of new date, and then we are using it to return a new year. So again, we are getting the error message, and this will not work here. The only thing that this statement understands is that we want to return something. So instead of doing this, notice that we get two expressions. So this is not going to work. So what we can do, and you can do it a lot, you can create a different function that will, of course, host all this logic, and it will return a single value. For example, let me say I want to create a function called get the year, something like that. And this one is going to be equal just to a function. Now notice that we get two different functions, but the only one that gets exported at the end is the header. So it doesn't matter if we get 100 functions right here. The only one that is going to get exported as a component, it's header. So if I go and copy, all this logic, let me just copy all. I'm going to copy and remove it, and I'm going to go and paste it right here. Now we get two different, expressions. And at the end, we just want to return the new date. That's it. So now if I go here and make a reference to that function that returns a single statement, we get no errors, and we get the year back. Let me make this bigger. So you can use this logic inside of JSX. Of course, that's the main idea of all of this. Now, of course, and this is just ES6, instead of maybe using a function, you can do inline math operations like, 5 plus 5. So you can do that, of course. All right, of course, we're going to do a lot as we advance through the sections. So let's go to the next one. We're going to talk about something very important. Okay, so now we know that we get a functional component, this component that calls header, and we are just returning some JSX. So in this case, of course, this works. Now in React, we get two types of components, two different components. We get functional components. This is a functional component, and then we get class components. And now, of course, this is just ES6. Now, functional components are just functions. In this case, we get a component called header, which is just a function that returns some JSX. And that's okay. If you want to return something as simple as this, a functional component will work. But sometimes you need to do a little bit more. And in this case, you will use a class-based component. Now, classes, again, are from ES6, from JavaScript ES6, not from React. But we can use them along with React to create a much more powerful component. Now, the only way you can learn in how to create a component is just, creating it. So I'm going to delete this, and instead of returning a functional component for the header, I'm going to return a class-based component. So how can we create a class? Okay, so first we use the keyword class. What do we want to do? Well, I want to create a class called header. Now, if you're just using an ES6 class, you just do class header and you use the class. So if you want to know how this would work, maybe with ES6, it's like creating ES5, sorry, the old JavaScript version. It's like creating a header and then creating a container. That's it. So in this case, we are using classes. So when we want to create a class, we start with class and then we do header. Now the thing is that we want to use a class and we want to use a lot of things we get available with React, right? So React has a lot of functions, methods, and properties we can use. We can inject them right here inside this class. So of course, later we can use them. All right, how can we link our class right here with React? So what we do is we use the keyword extends right here at the top. And we say we want to bring from React something that calls component. So when we do this, the React will inject a lot of properties and methods we can use inside our class. So for example, if we want to render some contents, notice that right now we are getting errors. And it says instance render is not a function. So now this class is linked to React. And React, to render some components, some JSX, is going to look for a function called render. Now what we were doing, but before we were doing just to return something like that, return with a div of header. Let me just create a previous scenario. I'm going to create a div that returns some, header. Now this one, of course, will not work. This one works with JavaScript, right? I'm sorry, with a function. In this case, what we need to do, we need to use the render method. And this is something we get, of course, because we are injecting component. So we go and create this render. This render, it's a method, and at the end, it's going to return something. What it's going to be returning? Well, some JSX. So if we go to the application, we're going to get the header. So we always need to return something. Remember that. So in this case, I want to return something a little bit more, complete than just a div. What I want to do, I want to return the header just like this. And then I want to return a logo. We can add a logo. Let me say logo. And then I want some input, just an input, so the user can input some data. So we get it. Later, we're going to link this input, whatever we type inside here, we're going to link this with the other components we have right there, but we are not there yet. So now by doing this, we can use a lot of methods just like the render component that we get with React component. And of course, we will do so. Now, if you go to the web and try to find some information about class-based components, maybe you're going to find some examples doing just this. Now, what we can do, not to just type react.component every time we create a class-based component, we can use a little bit of ES6 magic and use destructuring and make a reference to component. And now at the bottom, we're going to say just component. And if I go and render, we get no errors, and that works. So this is just ES6. What we are doing is we are bringing from React something called React component, and we are changing that to a variable called component. So later in our application, when we make a reference to component, it will know that we are talking about React.component. So we can use it just like that. All right, very cool. Again, just baby steps. Now we know how to create a functional component and how to create a class-based component. And we know that on a functional, we return some JSX directly. And on a component and a class-based component, we need to go to through the render function. All right, okay, that's good. Let's go to the next one. And we're gonna, of course, talk about something else. Okay, before we move forward with classes and everything else, I would like to talk a little bit more about styles. This one is, of course, really ugly, so I would like to add some styles. I'm gonna bring something from Google Fonts, so we can get just better fonts. So I'm gonna go to Google Fonts, and the connection is a little bit slow. So I'm gonna go to Google Fonts, and I'm gonna bring a font called Anton. If you don't want to do this, that's okay. I'm gonna go Anton, and I want to bring Roboto. All right. So of course, I'm gonna copy all of this. I'm gonna copy the link. And what we can do to add fonts, of course, you can still go to the index.html. Everything starts right here. And whenever the bundle, gets rendered and created, it's gonna know how to handle this. So if we go to the application, I reload it, and we go at the top, we should be getting the cool fonts. So very cool. We can add them. All right, I'm gonna close this and go back. So of course, now we need to let the application know that we want to use those fonts, or maybe we want to give some styles. So in the React world, you get different ways of doing this. And there's no wrong or right way. If you like to import the CSS, you can do it. If you want to bring the styles right here, you can totally do it. It's completely, it's just completely up to you. So I'm going to show you different ways. One of the ways of doing this is just creating a variable right here. You could call it at the top or at the bottom. And I'm going to call this styles. Just like this. And this one is going to be just a variable. I'm going to do it at the top, outside the class. All right, so I'm going to go here and say styles. So now the styles, we can pass an object with properties that pretty much look like CSS, but they're going to be object. So React will know how to handle this. Now let me just show you. This is something you'll learn by example. So I'm going to say that I have style, and inside styles, I get a class called header, right? All right, so I'm going to open and close. So this class will get a background of, I don't know, maybe nice blue. I believe it's 0, 3, A, 9, F, and then 4. Just a nice blue color. Then I'm going to go and pretty much do the same for the logo, because we get the header and we get a logo. So I'm going to say I get a logo and open and close. I'm going to do a color, and I'm going to give it a color of white, 1, 2, 3. Comma, and now I need the font family. So we know that with CSS, we can do font, dash, and family. So this is not going to work with this method because we are using an object. This is not CSS. So what we need to do is camel case. So family. What is the name? It's Anton. Then a comma, text align. Remember, we cannot do this. So camel case, text align. All right, and I'm gonna do center. Right, so now we get an object with kind of something that looks like, classes. So how can we make a reference of these classes, these styles, to our application? Now, of course, this variable is available to use within this component. So what we can do, we can go right here and we use the style property. So JSX knows that we want to feed styles that it's an object that looks like CSS. So it will convert all of this code to styles. So I'm going to go and say, okay, I want to enter the styles variable, and I want to bring whatever we get inside header. Same thing for the other one. I'm going to go to the logo. I'm going to say style, open and close. I'm going to make a reference to styles dot and logo. So if we go to our application, we can get it. Of course, it's still really ugly, but we get the styles. All right. So this is one way to do it, right? This is one way to do it. And if you ask me, this approach, it's not very convenient because in real life, you will get hundreds of classes or, it's styles and everything else. So just doing this on each file, it's, I don't really like it. So I'm going to comment this out and I'm going to leave it because this file is going to go to you. And I'm going to remove this. I kind of don't need it right now. So this is the first way of doing things. You get a different way, which is the good old way of doing things. You can go to the public directory. You can create a folder called style, just like this, or styles, whatever. And you can put a CSS file called styles.css. And inside, of course, you can create whatever logic you want. Maybe I'm going to add the body. I'm going to access the body and add a margin of 0 because right now we are getting those weird, margins. And then we can pretty much do the same. So I'm going to go maybe to the header, copy the background. I'm going to say that I want a header with the background of this. All right, and we need to remove this, of course. Then I'm going to do comma. I'm going to do a little bit of text align. So align, and I'm going to do center. All right, sorry. There we go. Sometimes you you work with JavaScript a lot and you forget that this is not a comma. All right. So what else? We get the logo. I don't want to type all over again. Just gonna copy this one, go at the bottom, and say that now we get a class called logo, and this one will get a color of white. Convert this to CSS. Now we get the font family. The font family is gonna be with not a capital F, lowercase f, and same thing for text align. So text, and let me finish with this. Align. We do center, and that's it. All right. Okay, and I'm gonna add one more. We get the input, so I'm gonna add some stylings for the input. So this one, and maybe I'm gonna do a font size of, I don't know, 20 pixels. Sounds right. And a margin, of course, and I can add 20 pixels from the top and bottom, and 0 pixels, from the sides. Looks nice. Okay, so of course, now what we can do, we can go to the index.html, and since everything is inside public, we can of course import this. So I'm gonna go maybe at the bottom, and I want to create a link. Right, the link will get a rel of style sheet, and right here, of course, I'm not teaching you anything. And then of course, we could use the type. I'm not gonna use it. And then href, and this one is gonna be inside the styles / and styles.css. Right. So if we reload the application, we get the styles in the good old fashioned way. And you can still do this, of course, if you want. So this is the second way you get, of course, to handle styles in your application. Now you get a third way of doing things. I'm gonna comment this out, and I'm gonna go and create it. So what you can do, you can make a reference inside your component to that CSS, and those styles, of course, will get injected inside of the component whenever this gets rendered. Again, don't worry, just let me show you. I'm gonna go to source, and I'm gonna create a new directory called styles. Let me do it correctly, styles. All right, and this one will again do the same thing, styles.css, and it's just gonna copy everything we get right here and paste it here. All right. Okay, so now we get a style file inside the source directory. And then just let me give you a warning. Right now, I'm gonna import something from, of course, the styles. I'm gonna import it. Now, if you're trying to import something that it's outside the source, you're gonna get an error message. And we can actually do it. I'm gonna go and import and say I want to import dot / I'm gonna go outside of the of the components, outside of the source. I'm gonna go to public and try to bring the styles from the public. If I save it, not gonna work. It says your attempt to import which falls outside of the project source. So if you're of course using the create React app, this template, you cannot do this. You need to put it inside of the source. Now of course that's what I want to do. So I'm gonna delete this, and I'm gonna go to the index.js. Now I want to inject this file whenever my application gets rendered, because this is kind of the global styles. So I'm gonna say I want to import. I want to / I want to go to styles CSS. Now if I reload the application, let me just save this one. There we go. I'm gonna reload the application. We get the styles. So what it's doing, it's of course importing everything and injecting all these CSS on the header. Let me just find it right here. We get a style tag with all the styles. So this is a different way of doing things. All right. Okay, so let's keep moving forward. Now we get something maybe a little bit better. Let me just change the logo to white, just like we did before. I'm gonna go here, and I've added a class of logo. So remember that if we want to use a class, we need to use class name. And I'm gonna say logo. All right, ugly, but a little bit better. So let's go to the next one, and I want to talk about events. So one of the most important things when we work with applications are events. When when the user clicks on something, or when they enter some text inside of an input, or maybe they hover an element, we want to trigger some action so we can do something. So let's say that whenever the user clicks on the logo, we want to do something, for example. And so the main starting point is to using the onClick handler. We know that with vanilla JavaScript, we use onClick. So let me just go here and kind of do it. With vanilla, and when I say vanilla JavaScript, I'm meaning ES5, the old version of JavaScript. We do onClick, and of course we can trigger an event. So with React, it's pretty much the same, but we cannot use this one. We cannot use the onClick. What we do, again, just like we did before, we use camel case. Yeah. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways of doing this. It's pretty simple. Now, when we pass this property, right, we can do this and do something. But the thing is that this is not going to work, because what we want to do is to trigger some JavaScript. If we use the quotes, we can add some strings, but this is not what we want to do. We want to trigger a function or do something else. So in this case, we need to use the curly braces. And this is the first event we're going to talk about. We get a lot of events, but of course, this is the most easy and common event. So what do we do when we add an onClick? When we want to trigger something, how do we trigger it? Well, we run a function. So we're going to write just a fat arrow function right here. What do we want to do with this function? All right. So whenever the user clicks on something, we trigger the function, and we're going to do just a console log. And this one is going to say, I was clicked. Something simple. All right. So I'm going to save it, and I'm going to, of course, test it. We add the trigger to the logo, so I'm going to click it, and we get the console log. I was clicked, so, this one works. And this one, of course, we can simplify this one just a little bit more. Right now, again, we are running a function that it's doing just a single statement. So in this case, if I do something like this is still going to work, because we are returning a single statement, just like we discussed previously. And if I click it, we get I was clicked. Same thing if we had a different one. Let's say that I'm going to add a const of something, hello, and whatever, just a value. Of course, we cannot do this because we have two statements. So just like we did before, what we can do is just create a function right here at the top. Let's say I'm going to call this one hello, whatever, doesn't matter. And this one is going to be equal to a fat arrow function that is going to do something, right? Oh, sorry, just a function. Let me go here. All right. So what are we going to do? Well, the only thing we want to do is just console log I was clicked. That's it. I'm going to delete everything else. Now what we need to do, of course, when this gets clicked, we want to make a reference to this function, right? So I'm going to do hello and just say we want to trigger hello. That's it. I'm going to save it. And of course, hello. Let me just go here. Okay. So we're going to reload the application, and it says hello is not defined. And this is actually quite good. When we are working with a function just like this, with a functional component, we know that we can add functions right here, and we can make a reference to them from here, because everything is on the same function. Now with classes, everything works in just a little bit different. We just cannot make a reference to hello just like it is. We need to make a reference to this class dot hello. So now this class, this render component, this render method will know that we want to invoke a function called hello that it's inside this class. That's why we use it this way. So if I save it and reload the application, we check it and we get I was clicked. So remember, when you use classes, you always need to use this. All right, so we can simplify this a little bit more. I'm going to go here and say that I want to delete this and I want to delete this. And the only thing I want to do is to trigger this .hello whenever we do onClick. So if we go to the application, we still get it. Really, really cool. Now, what you need to do when you do this method, don't do this. Because if I reload the application, that is going to get triggered as soon as the application renders this component. That's why I never clicked it, but I'm still triggering this function. So if you don't want to trigger it at the beginning, you just need to make a reference to this .hello. All right, really cool stuff. Now, what I want to do, let's do something a little bit more challenging. Instead of adding an onClick, what I want to do is go to the input and know or trigger an event wherever the user is, typing something on the input. And for this one, of course, we cannot use the onClick. We're going to use something else. What do we need to use? We need to use onChange. So whenever the user is trying to change something on the input, we're going to trigger a function and trying to know or to get whatever the user is typing. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to create a function called input change. All right. Of course, we don't have this function. I'm going to go and just create it right now. Now, I like to create the functions just like this. What you can do, and you're going to see it in the different examples, is just creating the functions just like this. These ones are pretty much the same. We get a tiny difference, but I don't want to go into that detail right now. So I'm going to trigger the input change, all right? Of course, what I can do, I'm going to go and say console log, and then maybe user type something like that. User typed something, whatever. Okay. I mean, talking and writing, it's not that easy. So I'm going to go and type something, and we get user type something. Now, it would be wonderful if we get a way to know what the user is entering right here. And that's the main point of all of this. So whenever you use an onChange, you get the ability to access the event. And this one works just like ES5, just like regular JavaScript, not React, just regular ES6 or ES5. This works the same way. You trigger the onChange and you get access to the actual event. So if I go to input change and say event right here, and I make a reference to the event, I'm gonna paste it. And if I type something, we get the event. And this keyword, it's a little bit important. We're going to talk about this in a second. So we're going to get all the information of what's happening with, that event. So if we go to the event, that target, that value, just like JavaScript, we know that, we get access to the data we want to get. So I'm going to go, and instead of consoling log the event, I'm going to do event dot target dot and then value. All right, so I'm going to go here, I'm going to type the letter D, and we get the D. We are getting the value of that event. Same thing if we add more things. So of course, by default, you get access to this event, and you can make a reference through an argument. And this, you get it by default. Now the main keyword, remember I told you that we get that keyword synthetic event. So if we go to the documentation, I can have the link right here. So if we go right here, we say doc events, and it says this reference guide documents the synthetic events wrapped, with the form, whatever. So they are not just events, they are synthetic events. Remember that we are not really using the browser events, the common events we would get with ES5. We are doing everything through React. So React is in charge of everything. It's not pretty secure, just run something that will interact with the DOM directly, right? We need to do everything through React. That's why this onClick is not just like this. It's with a capital C, which is a synthetic event. Now, if we go all the way to the bottom, you're gonna say supported events. So you're gonna get all these ones. You get focus events, mouse events, pointer events, and right now we are using the mouse events. With the click, for example, we get the onChange when we use with forms, form events, and you're gonna get it right here. On click, we get on mouse for mouse events. Let me go at the top. We get the onChange, on input, and on valid. So again, right here in the docs, you get a list of all the events you could use with this ones. Now again, these ones just work. They work just like regular JavaScript events. The only difference is that we need to use it with camel case. That's it. I want to add one more thing before we go to the next one, because if you're trying to find some information on the web about this, events, maybe you're gonna find an example that looks a little bit weird. So let's. I'm gonna go here, and instead of just triggering this that input change, I'm gonna use it the way we were using it before. I'm gonna go to input change, and I'm gonna open and close and make this a little bit better. So if I go to our application, reload it, and type something, we get an error. It's gonna say cannot read property target of undefined. So what we are doing here is trying to access the event that we are getting by default, right? But right now we are using this input change this way. So the onChange, whenever it gets triggered, is going to be passing the event. If you're using it just like this, we don't get it by default. We need to use to do some additional steps. The onChange will give us this event argument we can access. Since this one we triggered a function, we need to catch that event that we are getting from the onChange. In this case, I'm going to call it E. I could call it event. Let me call it event. Right. So then when we trigger the function, we don't still have access to that event. When we say, okay, run a function that runs that input change. Okay, the input change needs access to this event that we got right here. So we need to do the same thing. We need to put event. If I reload the application and try again, we get it. So, I just wanted to add this because sometimes you go to the web and you try to find some examples and you get different ways of doing things. And if you're not really comfortable with ES6, it's going to get a little bit confusing. So just, letting you know. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Maybe I'm going to give you some information about how classes work. Just a little bit more information about how classes work. If you know ES6 and you know how classes work in ES6, you don't need to go to the next section. You can go to the next one, which we're going to talk about state, and it's a very important section. So one of the most important features of React is going to be the state with class-based components. So the state is going to be an object that serves us like a component database. So we can store values or check for events. We can do a lot of things. We can get a lot of control on our component with using the state we get from React. Now remember we talked about functional components and class-based components. So every time we create a class for React, we get a default state. Now empty, of course, at the beginning. And with functional components, since we are just using functions, we don't get a state by default unless we use hooks. Remember, we're going to talk about hooks later. So with the class component, if the state changes for whatever reason, the application will re-render your code and try to render show those changes on the state, if of course you're using them. So what are we going to do? We're going to do everything right now. Now again, you don't need to memorize everything I'm saying. You don't need to do it because we're going to do it a million times right now, and we're going to do it a million times when we create the practice application. So don't try to stop or pause the video and try to memorize everything I say, right? Just you keep moving forward. Okay, so how can we create a state, or how can we access the state we get by default when we create a class-based component? All right, so I'm going to go at the top, and the only thing we need to do is to say state equals an object. That's it. That's the only thing we need to do. And in this case, what I want to do, I want to store inside the state the values that the user is entering on the input. That's what I want to do. So I'm going to go, and with object notation, I'm going to do keywords. You could put whatever you want right here, keywords. And this one is going to start with an empty value. That's the only thing we get on the state. And I'm pretty sure you must be saying, dude, this is just a variable with an object. And yeah, that's how it works. React knows that we are using a class, and that if we want to grab the state we just make a reference to state. So when React kicks in, it's going to look for this value right here, for this object. And of course, it's going to make all the logic behind the scenes for us. All right, so how can we access the state and change the state whenever the user is typing something? Pretty simple. I'm going to go and delete this. So whenever we do an onChange, we are triggering this function and we are catching the event. So in order to access the state, first we need to use the keyword this. Remember, we are saying go and try to find something that is inside this component. So we cannot just do something like this, dot state, and then keywords, and just change the values. So this one is actually gonna work, but we should not do this. We should use whatever React is giving us to handle the state. So this one, it's not allowed. You should never do that. So what we get when we bring this component is a method called setState. So open and close. And again, this is a method. So this one, what's going to do is going to go to the state add whatever information or modify whatever information we want to modify, and then the application is going to re-render the component. Don't worry, we're going to see it in action. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to change the state. So we need to pass the object. What do we want to do? Well, we want to enter the keywords and make some changes. All right, what's the change you want to make? Well, I want to put inside keywords whatever the user is typing inside the input. So we do event.target.value. Right. So if I reload the application and I type something, we are not getting an error message at least. All right, that's cool. So of course, inside the state, you can do whatever you want. You can put whatever value. You can host a function, you can host a string or a number of a Boolean, whatever. Again, this is just an object. So in this case, let's say I want to add a title. All right, so I'm gonna go maybe at the top and say I want to add a title. So this title, it's equal to a string. So the keywords are keywords. Let me do it correctly. Keywords are and column. That's it. So now, of course, when the application renders, we immediately on the first render, whenever the application shows the code on the screen, we get access to this state, and this is the initial state. So if I go to the application and maybe, I don't know, create a div right here at the bottom that says, let me create the div first, that says, I want to show here whatever I get inside the this.state.title. So the application, when it renders, it will know that we have some information on the state, and it will put whatever we have inside title. That's why we get the keywords are. So okay, so now what I want to do, I want to show the keywords at the bottom. So I'm gonna do div, I'm gonna open and close, and I'm gonna say this.state.keywords. All right, let me make this a little bit better, so it's a little bit, better for humans. So I'm gonna reload the application, and I'm going to start, of course, typing something. I'm going to type, and we get the values at the bottom, right? Really, really cool. So let me give you a little bit more information of what's happening right here, because everything happens in a kind of a magical way, and there's a logic behind all of this, of course. So, okay, so when I type a character on the input, the letter A, for example, this is going to trigger the function input change, right? It's going to trigger this function. And this one, of course, is going to go through the function we get right here, and we're going to trigger the set state. Now, this one is going to go to keywords and modify whatever value we have right here. It's going to go to the property keywords, and it's going to put that A character we are adding. So now, of course, we are modifying the state, right? We get a new state. So React, it's always listening for changes on this state. So it's going to detect a change on keywords, and it's going to say, okay, so the state, it's not, the keywords is not empty anymore. We are detecting a change. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to re-render this function. It's going to go to the render. It's going to trigger this render again. So when it renders again, you're going to get the changes on the screen. So everything works just like with layers. You're detecting a change on the state. It's going to trigger this function again because it is just a function, and it will show the new version of what you get on the screen. Since you're making a reference to this, the state keywords, and state that keywords is not empty anymore, you get, a letter A is going to display the letter A. If I do B, it's going to do the letter B. If I do C, it's going to, show the letter C. So it's always listening for changes on the state. And if you're detecting a change, it's going to re-trigger this render, which is just a function. It's just a function that returns JSX. And I can actually prove this. I'm gonna go, let me delete this. I'm gonna save it, and I'm gonna go to the render again. Now this is just a function, and we are returning some JSX. But right here, since this is just a function, you can even do a console log, or you can even create a variable right here and put it on this section. So in this case, I'm gonna do this that state. Now the application renders, let me reload it, renders for the first time. And of course, we are triggering this state. Right now, we don't get anything. We get keywords and we get the title. So if I type something, of course, React is listening for this. It's going to update the state, and it's going to re-trigger this function. So if it's re-triggering this, we're going to get another console log with, with the changes. So I'm going to type A, and we get another console log with the new state of things. So really cool. It's really simple. We're behind the scenes. It's easy to understand, but it's really useful, because if your application gets a lot of information, or maybe I don't know, a user's profile that keeps constantly changing, the only thing you need to do is to make a reference to that state, and if the information changes many times, React will handle all the change for you and show it on the screen if you need to show it on the screen. Now, of course, we get a lot more things we can do with state, not just rendering some information. But don't worry, we're gonna do all of this as we advance through the course. So you have another way to use that set state, and I'm gonna just show you right now. I'm gonna leave the console log. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna give you a different example. I'm gonna add just a property called count, and this one will start at 0. Pretty simple stuff. I'm gonna go at the bottom. I'm gonna make maybe a break, something dumb, and I'm gonna of course add a div of that state dot, and I'm gonna say count. That's it. So the only thing I want to do is whenever the application renders, I want to see that 0 at the beginning. Okay. Now I'm gonna add a button and add 1 every time we press the button. Pretty simple. So I'm gonna do button, open and close, and this one is gonna be at 1. Now, how can we trigger a change when we click on this button? What do we need to do first? Well, first we need to use the event listener on click, the synthetic event. So this one is gonna trigger a function. I'm gonna create. We didn't have that function. I'm gonna create one right now. So I'm gonna say this one adds 1. We don't have the function. We need to create it. So I'm gonna go before the render, and I'm gonna say, okay, I want a function called add1, and this one, the only thing that's gonna do is gonna add 1 to the default state, to 0. So what do? We're gonna say this dot set state open and close. We need to access an object. What else do we need to do? Well, I need to access the count. So what we can do is that we can make a reference to that state, that count, right? And then add 1 to that value. And this is actually going to work. If I reload the application, I'm going to add 1 and we can get it. And notice that everything re-renders and we get always a console log with a new state. Okay, that works. Now there is a problem with this approach, and all of this is of course on the documentation. Right now, of course, when we click the button, we are updating the state. And then we are making a reference to that state, that count. So this value, it's equal of this current version of the state. Maybe the next time, of course, the user clicks, and this one is going to be equal to 2, or maybe to 3, or to 4. Depends on which version of the state you're currently in. Now remember that this one kicks in before the render. If you click it and your value is 0, the value of the state count is going to be 0, and then you add 1. Now the problem with this approach is that if in the future you might get other functions that you're triggering these other functions, and they will go and do something to the state. So maybe if you're here and you're making a reference to that state, that count, and you have other functions that are doing different things to the state, you might get the incorrect value right here because the data keeps changing. It's constantly changing. Now, on this case, we are not going to get a problem because we just have a single function, a simple application that is just getting the count. Of course, we are not going to get a problem. But again, in the future, your components will get pretty big, and you're going to get functions doing something to the state all over the place. So React, and again, if you go to the docs, you're going to see this example. They give us a different way of, updating the state and not, there's one over here at the bottom, updating the state and not making a reference to that state, that count, to get the current value of the count of the state. So I'm gonna pretty much list this and start over. So instead of passing just an object, what we can do, we can pass a function, right? Now this function, it's not gonna return some JavaScript code. It will need to return this, parentheses, and inside will return an object. All right. So this function, with this function, what we get with this set state is access to two different arguments. The first one is the state, and the other one is the props. Later, we're going to talk about props. We are not there yet. The one we care right now is state. So this function, what gives us is kind of a static version of the current version of the state. So we are not accessing to that state. We are accessing a copy of the state. So if I want to do a count, there's no need for me to do that state, because I already have a copy of the static version of state. So if I do state.count plus 1, this is still going to work. So I'm going to reload it, add 1, and we still get it. So again, you should never do that state, that whatever property that you're using, to know the current value of the state. Instead, you should use the function and get the argument, which is a copy of the current state. And again, all of this is on the documentation. And of course, at the end of the day, you can do whatever you want. This is the best way of doing it, but React will not recommend you to do this. And again, everything is on the docs. All right, okay, so we are good with this.